A simple question from an 8-year-old girl silenced an entire community assembly and led Jack Reacher to share a deeply intimate account of loss of faith and redemption. What followed moved everyone. The parish hall in Helena, Montana, whispered with the metallic sound of chairs being dragged across the waxed floor and low conversations. A space usually used for local meetings and after-service coffees. That night it seemed to carry something more solemn. At the front of the room stood Jack Reacher. Imposing but calm, his unmistakable bearing contrasted with the simple surroundings. Known for his unwavering posture and steely gaze, that night, however, he exuded a more introspective air, as if he were carrying deep memories. The audience was made up of families, veterans, retirees, and curious people from the small town, interested in hearing what this man with an enigmatic past had to say. But among them, one figure stood out. Not because of her height, but because of her silent presence, an 8-year-old girl called Lily. She wore her best Sunday dress and clutched an old leather Bible inherited from her grandmother. The pages were yellowed, and the golden letters had almost faded. Before they left home, her mother had told her, "You can ask, but only if you have the courage and really believe it." Lily nodded, her heart racing. She had rehearsed her question for weeks, writing it down on notebooks in the playground and whispering it to herself before bed. It wasn't a silly doubt. It was something that weighed heavily on her little heart. As the night wore on, Reacher talked about his wandering life, the people he met and the stories he saw unfold. He touched on themes such as justice, choices, and even recounted episodes from his travels on American roads. The audience reacted with small applause, but the mood was restrained. Lily waited, her hands firmly clutching the Bible. Finally, the microphone was released for questions. A queue quickly formed. Adults sought advice on safety, wanted to hear more about their time in the armed forces, or just to thank her for her words. She hesitated. Her body sank into the chair, but her mother gave her a little push. It was now or never. Her legs trembled, her heart felt like a drum. But she went. The queue moved slowly, and soon people began to notice the small figure with the huge Bible in her arms. Murmurs ran through the hall. When it was his turn, Reacher looked directly at her. His countenance softened, and for a moment his hardened features seemed more human. "And what is your question, young lady?" he asked, his voice deep but welcoming. Lily took a deep breath, clutched the book tighter, and, in a shaky but determined voice, asked, "Mr. Reacher, what does God mean to you?" Silence fell like a heavy curtain. All eyes were on the two of them, the girl and the man who had faced criminals, injustice, and fate itself. Now faced with a question that was impossible to ignore. Reacher didn't answer immediately. He looked at Lily, then at the Bible she was holding. His body, usually as still as a statue, seemed to relax. There was something different in his gaze. A mixture of surprise, respect, and perhaps gratitude. The silence dragged on, not for lack of words, but because, for the first time, Jack Reacher seemed to be searching inside himself for something that couldn't be found on any road or military report. He raised his hand slowly and leaned on the makeshift lectern. "That is a powerful question," he began, his voice hoarse, almost like a whisper, "and I haven't always had a clear answer." The audience held its breath. "When I was your age, my mother taught me to be strong, but even she couldn't explain everything about God. I went to churches, camps, read verses, but you know what? I often felt alone, especially when I lost my father." He paused, looking at the attentive faces. "I wondered, if God was there, why did he allow certain things?" He paused again, this time looking lost for a second. Then he turned back to Lily, now looking almost protective. "But it was on the road, crossing small towns like yours, helping strangers, sitting in diners and listening to stories, that I began to understand. Maybe God is in the details, in the choices we make, in the good we spread, even if we don't know if it will work out." Total silence. Not even the creak of a chair could be heard. Faith, he said calmly, is like a dusty staircase in a dark basement. Sometimes you can't see the top, but you keep climbing step by step, trusting that something good awaits you at the top. Little Lily just nodded, her eyes watering. And that's when everyone understood. This wasn't just Jack Reacher's story, it was everyone's. You climb step by step and sometimes you feel like you could plummet at any moment, said Reacher, his gaze distant for a moment. But you keep climbing, because something up there is worth the effort. At the time I heard this from my father, I didn't understand what he meant. I thought it was just another one of those phrases adults say to calm down confused children. A light chuckle ran through the room, breaking some of the silent tension. But Lily didn't laugh. Her eyes remained locked on Reacher with the intensity of someone who was there for a truth, not a nice story. Reacher leaned forward slightly, his voice becoming softer, almost a whisper. When I grew up, life tested me. I lost important people. I faced failures that almost broke me. And there were moments, long moments, when I felt that God had left me alone. The words fell with weight. These were not ready-made sentences. They were raw, coming from a man who bore scars both on his skin and in his soul. Sometimes, he continued, I got angry. At other times, I simply thought he had given up on me. The room, still full, was absolutely silent. It was no longer a meeting. It was a confession, and everyone was listening with their hearts. But you know what, Lily? He said with a new, firmer tone. Over time, I've learned that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's continuing to believe. Even when you can't see 2 steps ahead, it's accepting that there is a bigger plan, even when everything seems out of place. He turned his eyes to the girl. She relaxed slightly. Her eyes, large and moist, reflected the white light from the ceiling. And God, for me, Reacher said slowly, is that plan. It's that voice that says keep going, even when the ground looks like it's going to give way. It's the reminder that even though we're hurt, we're not finished. Tears flowed from Lily's eyes, not like a frightened child, but like someone who finally felt understood. A solitary drop ran down her cheek as she clutched her grandmother's Bible tightly to her chest. Her shoulders began to shake. The crowd noticed and murmured, but no one had the courage to break the moment. Her mother instinctively put her arm around her daughter's back. It's all right, darling, she whispered. But Lily shook her head. That wasn't pain. It was as if Reacher had said something she had needed to hear for a long time, something that unlocked a memory, a feeling, an emptiness she couldn't name. Reacher noticed. He took a step forward, away from the pulpit. What's your name? He asked gently. Lily, she whispered, almost inaudibly. A very beautiful name, he said with a restrained smile. You know, Lily, sometimes the simplest questions are the ones that move us the most. They remind us of what really matters. Lily nodded. Her eyes were still watery, but now there was something new there. Pride. My grandmother used to say that too, she said softly, that God listens even when we can't hear him. Reacher was silent for a moment, visibly touched. He took a deep breath, turned to the audience, and then said, This little girl has just asked the question that many adults spend their lives avoiding. What does God mean to me? He paused. It's not an easy question, because it requires courage to look inwards, to face our doubts, to admit that we don't always have everything under control. The room seemed suspended in time. Lily, who a few minutes ago was just a child among adults, was now the center of the room, the symbol of a night transformed. Reacher continued, The truth is that we live on the outside looking for answers. We think that titles, positions, or money will fulfill us, but they don't. The questions that matter are the ones that bother us. They are the ones that make us face the mirror and ask, what do I believe? Who am I when no one is looking? He looked back at Lily. Thank you for reminding me of that. You're wiser than a lot of adults out there. The audience responded with soft, respectful applause, but Lily seemed oblivious. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her dress and looked at her mother, who was smiling with tears in her eyes. The sound of applause died down. The atmosphere seemed calmer, more intimate, but Reacher wasn't finished. There was more. He straightened his posture on the lectern, looked at everyone, and then back at Lily. "When I was young," he began, his voice reminiscent, "I thought I was in control of everything, that with strength and discipline, nothing could get me down. I had plans, goals, and a blind determination to win. But then came a day, just one day, and everything changed." Reacher paused. A thick silence hung in the air. This was one of the rare occasions when he allowed the veil of his private life to be slightly lifted. And everyone in the room felt it. "My brother, Frank," he began, his voice lower, "was one of those people you meet, and then you realize there's something different about this guy. He had a light, a kindness that I didn't even know how to understand at the time. But Frank also carried internal battles, demons that not even those who loved him could keep at bay." Reacher's voice faltered for a brief second. He cleared his throat, his eyes downcast. "When he left, I was angry. Anger at him, anger at myself, and anger at God. I couldn't understand why someone so good, with so much to offer, had to leave so soon." Lily kept looking at him, as if she was reading not only his words, but between the lines. All around, faces were filled with empathy and genuine attention. "For a long time after that," Reacher continued, "I distanced myself from the idea of God. I thought, if he exists, why did he let this happen? Why did he take Frank and leave me here, wandering aimlessly?" He took a deep breath, his hands clenched tightly on the sides of the pulpit. "But then, something changed. I don't know if it was a dream, a memory, but one night I saw his face. He was smiling, that usual crooked smile, and he said to me, 'Don't carry this alone, Reacher. You still have a way to go.'" The room went on in absolute silence. Even the sounds of the street seemed to have disappeared. All that remained was Jack Reacher's voice and the audience's suspended hearts. "From then on," he said now more firmly, "I began to understand that faith is not having all the answers. It's trusting, even in the dark. It's accepting that there is a reason, even when you can't see it." He looked at Lily again, his eyes soft. "So when you ask me what God means to me, I say this: He's the reason I keep going, even when everything falls apart. He is the reminder that there is something bigger than just us, and He's the one who gives us hope when all else fails." Lily didn't cry this time, but her eyes were shining, and she settled down on the bench, holding her grandmother's Bible with both hands, as if she were holding a piece of her own heart. But before the moment was over, a new voice rang out. A simple-looking man raised his hand from the back of the room. He looked like someone used to hard labor, calloused hands, serious look. He could have been a local handyman, a widowed father, or someone who only managed to go to church once in a while, when life allowed. "Mr. Reacher," he said in a firm voice, "I've spent years trying to understand my faith. What you said about anger, doubt, hope, makes me wonder, is part of our problem being afraid to admit that we're struggling?" Reacher seemed to be taken aback, but he didn't hesitate. He leaned slightly on the lectern, facing the man. "I think you've hit the nail on the head," he replied. "We're afraid of appearing weak, to admit that faith isn't easy, that sometimes it just seems like a cry in the dark. But that's exactly what makes it so powerful. It's not about being certain. It's about continuing to try even when you can't see the way." The man nodded and sat back down. A murmur of agreement passed through the room. And then, as if the words had pulled on another invisible string, Lily spoke. "My grandmother used to say that faith is like planting seeds." Her voice was firm, despite her shyness. "You don't always see them grow right away, but you have to believe that they will." Reacher smiled. A sincere, rare smile, the kind that softens even the most rigid countenance. "Your grandmother was very wise," he said, "and she was right. Faith is a seed. Sometimes it sprouts in silence, in the shadows, but it's there, growing, even when you don't see it." Something changed in the room. People exchanged glances, restrained smiles. What had begun as an ordinary meeting was now a moment of deep sharing, of humanity. An elderly woman, her hair in a tight bun, gently raised her hand. "I lost my husband last year." Her voice was shaky. "I've been angry with God ever since. I feel like I've lost faith. Do you think it's too late to find her again?" Richa took a few steps forward, approaching the edge of the small stage. "It's never too late," he said firmly. "Faith is not something you lose forever. She's patient. It waits for you, even when you turn away from it." "And sometimes," said Richa in a calm voice, "it's in the quietest moments when you least expect it that faith finds you again." The lady nodded with watery eyes. Around the room, people discreetly wiped their faces. Some just sat still, immersed in thoughts that one dare not say out loud. What was happening there was no longer a question session. It wasn't about religion or right answers. It was about human connection. And what followed further deepened this invisible bond between everyone in that church hall, in a small town forgotten by time. The atmosphere was charged with emotion. It wasn't noisy, but dense, as if a current of something invisible passed between everyone, shared pain, renewed hope, respectful silence. Lily's question had opened a door that no one knew existed, and now no one wanted it to close. Richa straightened up, his gaze sweeping the audience with the attention of someone who always observes before acting. "I've learned something important over the years," he said slowly. "Faith doesn't always come in big gestures or miracles. It comes in the little things. When someone holds your hand, when someone really listens to what you have to say, or when a little girl stands up and asks the question that everyone wishes they had the courage to ask." The words landed like seeds in the hearts of the audience. Richa pointed softly at Lily with respect. "That little girl reminded me today that faith is not just a concept. It's an action. It's a choice. When we live our faith, it spreads, and it changes everything around." Lily smiled, a shy smile, but full of light. Her mother hugged her lightly, saying something in her ear that made her smile even more. Richa took on a firmer tone, but without losing the softness that had won over the audience. "The truth is that we live in a time when the world seems to want to divide us. Politics, beliefs, differences. But faith has the power to remind us that despite our different paths, we are all climbing the same ladder, one step at a time." A timid applause broke out in the background. Soon more hands joined in. People stood up. It wasn't just for Richa. It was for everything. For Lily's courage, for the stories told, for the truth shared that night. When the applause died down, Richa leaned over the lectern one last time. "So, before you go," he said, "ask yourself, what does faith mean to you? And don't be afraid of the answer, even if it's uncertain. Because faith isn't about being sure. It's about continuing to believe anyway." He paused. He took a deep breath. "And if tonight something has touched your heart, hold on to it, let it grow, and share it, especially with those who need it most." This time, the applause was accompanied by hugs of people who hadn't even met before, greeting each other, exchanging words of support. It was as if the hall had been transformed into something more than wooden walls and benches. It was a healing space. Richa stepped out from behind the pulpit and walked over to Lily. He knelt down slightly so that he was eye level with her. "Thank you, Lily," he said seriously but with a rare tenderness. "You have more courage than many adults I've ever met in this life. Don't ever lose that." She put out her little hand and shook his firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Richa," she said confidently, "for answering." Richa stood up, smiled at her, and waved discreetly to the audience before leaving. But what he left behind was bigger than his presence. It was something that would stay with each person there for a long time. Lily looked at her mother. "Grandma would be proud, wouldn't she?" Her mother smiled, her eyes full of water. More than proud, she'd be delighted. As the hall slowly emptied, the message was clear. Sometimes the bravest questions lead us to the most unexpected answers. And in those answers, we rediscover parts of ourselves that we didn't even know were lost. If this story touched something inside you, take a moment to reflect on your faith. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories that reveal the best, and sometimes the worst, of human beings. Do you want to continue being moved? Click now on one of the videos appearing here and discover another story that will touch your heart. See you in the next video.